At exactly 7:45 a.m., Marcia stepped out of her car and into the glass tower that bore her company's name across its polished facade. The security guards straightened instantly. Employees who had been laughing near the lobby reception lowered their voices. Conversations shifted from casual gossip to performance metrics within seconds of her heels touching the marble floor. Marcia did not demand fear. She inspired it. She walked with precise, unhurried strides, her navy suit tailored to perfection, her hair sleek and controlled, much like the empire she had built over the last decade. At 35, she was the youngest director in the company's history. She had started as a junior analyst, learned every layer of the business, and climbed without shortcuts. Every contract signed, every expansion launched, every acquisition completed had her fingerprints on it. Inside the boardroom, the air felt heavier when she entered. 12 executives sat around the long table, their laptops open, their posture alert. "Let's begin," Marcia said, placing her tablet down without looking at anyone in particular. Her voice was calm, measured, deadly efficient. The quarterly projections were presented. A regional manager stumbled over a forecast explanation. Marcia did not raise her voice. She simply asked one question, precise, surgical, that exposed a weak assumption buried in his numbers. Silence followed. "Redo the analysis," she instructed. "I want verified data by tomorrow morning." No one argued. To her team, she was demanding but fair. She rewarded excellence generously and dismantled incompetence without hesitation. Investors trusted her because she did not gamble. Employees respected her because she never asked for sacrifices she would not make herself. But above all, Marcia was disciplined, and discipline had always protected her. By noon, she was in her private office overlooking the city skyline, reviewing documents related to the biggest opportunity of her career, a multi-million-dollar infrastructure tender that would secure the company's dominance for the next 5 years. It was more than a contract. It was leverage, expansion capital, global credibility. She had negotiated for months. Late-night conference calls, international site visits, endless revisions. The final decision would be announced within weeks. If she secured it, no one would ever question her authority again. Her phone vibrated softly on the desk. She glanced at the screen. Nail. A small smile appeared. Automatic, practiced. She answered. "Lunch," he asked casually. "I can't. Tender meeting in 30 minutes. "You're always busy." He said it lightly, teasing almost. But there was something beneath it, a thin edge she couldn't quite place. "It's temporary," she replied. "Once this is done, I'll have more space." "Of course," Nail said. "Do your thing, Director." She frowned slightly at the tone but dismissed it. Nail had always joked about her title. He had supported her career from the beginning, or at least, that's what she believed. When she returned home that evening, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Nail wasn't in the living room. The lights were dim. She set her briefcase down and loosened her collar. From the upstairs hallway, she heard the faint murmur of his voice. He was on the phone. She climbed halfway up the stairs before catching the tail end of the conversation. "No, she doesn't know, relax." Silence followed. A door clicked shut. Marcia paused. She told herself not to be paranoid. Nail worked in the same company, albeit in a mid-level managerial role. Confidential conversations were normal. Corporate strategy often required discretion. Still, something about the phrase lingered. She doesn't know. At dinner, Nail was charming, attentive. He poured her wine and asked about her day. He laughed at her story about a supplier negotiation. He touched her hand across the table. Yet there was a distance in his eyes, as if part of him was somewhere else. "Are you stressed?" she asked suddenly. "Why would I be? You've been distracted." He smiled. "Perfect. Controlled. You're imagining things. You're the stressed one." Maybe he was right. Over the next week, the signs multiplied, but subtly. Late meetings that stretched past midnight. Phone calls he took outside. Messages he turned face down when she entered the room. Marcia noticed patterns. She was trained to notice patterns. But in business, patterns led to solutions. At home, they led to discomfort. One evening, she woke at 2:13 a.m. to the faint glow of light beside her. Neil was sitting on the edge of the bed, typing on his phone. "Who's that?" she murmured sleepily. "Work," he replied quickly. "Asia Branch." At 2:13 a.m., she wanted to press further, but exhaustion pulled her back under. The next morning, she found herself unusually sharp in the boardroom. More decisive, more commanding, as if tightening her control at work could compensate for the uncertainty at home. During a strategy session for the tender presentation, she outlined a bold pricing structure that would outmaneuver their competitors without compromising margins. "This will intimidate them," one executive said cautiously. "Good," Marcia replied. "Let them feel it. Control, precision, strategy." These were languages she understood. Later that day, she noticed something else. Two department heads stopped talking when she entered the hallway. A glance exchanged. Too quick, too careful. Her instinct stirred. "Is there something I should know?" she asked coolly. They shook their heads immediately. "Of course not, Director." She studied their faces for a beat longer than necessary. They broke eye contact first. The sensation followed her into the elevator, into her office, into the evening. At home, Neil was showering when his phone buzzed on the bedside table. The screen lit up. A name appeared. Lena, Marketing. Marcia stared at it. Lena was a junior staff member. Polite, quiet, unremarkable. Why would she be texting her husband at this hour? The phone buzzed again. She reached toward it, then stopped. What was she doing? Trust was the foundation of marriage. She had always believed that, just as transparency was the foundation of leadership. When Neil came out of the bathroom, towel draped over his shoulders, he noticed the slight tension in her posture. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," she answered smoothly. She was good at composure. Years of boardroom warfare had trained her well. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. She thought about the tender, about the board, about the whispers in hallways. And now Lena. For the first time in years, uncertainty crept into her mind. Not about numbers, not about strategy, but about loyalty. The next morning, she arrived at the office earlier than usual. Through the glass walls of the marketing department, she saw Lena laughing at something on her phone. A private smile. Secretive. Marcia stepped inside. The room quieted instantly. "Good morning, Director," Lena said, standing up too quickly. Marcia observed her carefully. Early 20s, bright eyes, innocent expression. "Is the promotional deck for the tender finalized?" Marcia asked. "Yes. I sent it to Mr. Nail for review last night." A beat of silence. "For review," Marcia repeated calmly. "Yes, he said he wanted to support the strategy alignment." "Support." Marcia nodded once. "Next time, send it to me, directly." "Of course." She left without another word. Back in her office, she closed the door and stood still. Nail had no formal authority over the tender process. Why was he inserting himself? She opened her laptop and reviewed internal access logs. Her pulse slowed, not from panic, but from focus. Several sensitive documents related to pricing models had been accessed from Nail's credentials late at night. Not illegal, but unnecessary. Marcia leaned back in her chair. In business, there were always early warning signs before a crisis. Minor inconsistencies, slight shifts in behavior, quiet alliances forming beneath the surface. She had learned to act before the explosion. At home that evening, she studied Nail more carefully than ever. He was animated, telling a story about office politics. He laughed easily. He seemed relaxed. Too relaxed. "Do you trust me?" he asked suddenly, as if sensing her gaze. She met his eyes. "Yes," she said. And in that moment, she realized something terrifying. She wanted that to be true. But discipline had always protected her. And discipline required clarity. As she lay in bed that night, staring into the darkness, Marcia made a silent decision. She would secure the tender first, lock the future, strengthen her position. Then she would uncover the truth, whatever it cost. Because in the boardroom, she was a queen, and queens did not fall without a fight. Marcia did not confront problems blindly. She investigated them. 3 days after reviewing the internal access logs, she requested a discreet audit from the IT security team, framed as a routine compliance check ahead of the tender finalization. No alarms, no accusations, just quiet observation. She worked as usual, commanding meetings, refining pricing structures, preparing contingency plans. But beneath the surface, her focus had sharpened into something colder. Patterns were emerging. Late-night downloads, file transfers routed through shared drives, access timestamps aligning almost perfectly with Nail's supposed Asia branch calls. By Friday afternoon, the IT manager knocked softly on her office door. "You asked for a discreet review, Director," he said, placing a folder on her desk. "There are irregularities." Marcia opened the folder without expression. Several confidential tender documents had been copied to an external storage device. User credentials, Nail. Authorization level limited. Override access. Temporary, granted 2 months ago. Granted by whom? Her own office. Her jaw tightened. 2 months ago, she had approved a temporary system expansion after Nail casually mentioned wanting to contribute more strategically. She had seen it as ambition, as support. Now it looked like preparation. "Has anything been sent outside the company?" she asked evenly. "Not that we can trace directly, but the copying activity is significant." "Thank you," she said. "Keep this between us." When the door closed, the silence inside her office felt suffocating. This was no longer paranoia. This was evidence. That evening, she left the office later than usual and deliberately avoided telling Nail she was on her way home. She drove past their house once, then circled back slowly. The living room lights were off, but a car was parked outside. Not hers, not Nail's. Her pulse remained steady. Years of negotiation had trained her not to react prematurely. She parked 2 houses down and walked quietly toward the front door. It was unlocked. Inside, the house was dim. From the dining area, soft laughter floated through the air. A woman's laughter. Marcia stepped forward silently. Lena was sitting at her dining table, wearing one of Marcia's wine glasses in her hand. Nail stood beside her, leaning casually against a chair, smiling in a way Marcia had not seen in months. For a moment, time did not shatter. It froze. Lena noticed her first. Her face drained of color. "Director." Nail turned abruptly. The smile disappeared. "Marcia," he said too quickly. "You're home early." Marcia's eyes moved from Lena's flushed cheeks to the open bottle of wine, to the comfortable proximity between them. "This is a work discussion," she asked calmly. Lena stood up, hands trembling. I should go." "Yes," Marcia replied without raising her voice. "You should." Lena rushed past her, heels clicking rapidly against the floor. The front door closed with a hollow sound. Silence settled between husband and wife. Nail exhaled sharply. "You're overreacting." "Am I?" "It's not what it looks like." Marcia walked to the table and gently lifted the second wine glass, the one Nail had been using. "Explain what it looks like," she said. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. She came to discuss marketing angles for the tender. "You're always busy." "I'm trying to help." "In my house." "You're making this dramatic." "Dramatic." The word echoed in her mind. Marcia placed the glass back down carefully. "How long?" she asked. "There's nothing to confess." Her eyes hardened. "How long, Nail?" He looked away, and that was the answer. The air between them shifted, no longer uncertain, no longer ambiguous. It was betrayal, not whispered, not hidden, standing in plain sight. "I trusted you," she said quietly. "And I supported you for years," he shot back. "You think it's easy living in your shadow. You're the director. You're the star. I'm just the husband." Her chest tightened, not from heartbreak, but from realization. This was not just about an affair. This was about resentment, about ego, about power. "You chose this," she said evenly. "Not me." He did not deny it. "The next week," Humiliation became public. At the Monday executive meeting, 2 board members questioned her recent decisions regarding the tender pricing model, arguments almost identical to concerns she had privately discussed with Nail. Private conversations, repeating in the boardroom. Marcia answered with precision, dismantling each critique logically. But she noticed something more dangerous than opposition. She noticed hesitation. Allies who once backed her confidently now avoided eye contact. Information she had shared strategically seemed to circulate before she presented it. Meeting schedules shifted without her approval. A vendor renegotiation she had secured months ago was suddenly reopened, initiated by Nail. He was building alliances. Quietly. Calculated. In the cafeteria that afternoon, she overheard fragments of conversation. Director's been distracted? Maybe new leadership would stabilize things. Nail seems more collaborative. Collaborative. The word felt like acid. She returned to her office and began mapping internal shifts. Department heads who had recently started reporting through alternative channels. Budget reallocations subtly adjusted. Marketing campaigns redirected without her signature. It was not chaos. It was orchestration. That evening, she confronted Nail again. "Are you positioning yourself to replace me?" she asked directly. He laughed softly. "Replace you? Don't be ridiculous. Then why are my meetings being altered? Because you're overextending. The board sees it. I'm helping. By sleeping with my staff." His jaw tightened. "You keep reducing this to something personal." "It is personal. It's strategic," he corrected. The word struck harder than the affair. "Strategic." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You built this company, but you built it alone. You never let anyone share control. Not me. Not anyone. I earned control. And I'm earning influence." The honesty in his tone was chilling. He was not ashamed. He believed he deserved this. Over the next days, the manipulation intensified. An internal memo circulated suggesting leadership restructuring to optimize tender execution. Anonymous, but its phrasing mirrored Nail's language patterns exactly. Lena was promoted to a cross-department coordination role, granting her access to sensitive communication threads. Marcia requested a private board session. During the meeting, she presented performance metrics, risk analyses, and projections that clearly demonstrated stability under her leadership. But halfway through, one board member cleared his throat. "There are concerns about morale," he said carefully. "And about transparency." "Transparency," she repeated. "Some executives feel excluded from decision-making." She understood instantly. This was not about numbers. This was narrative, and Nail was shaping it. When she left the meeting, she saw Lena standing near the elevator, speaking quietly with 2 department heads. They fell silent when they noticed her. The humiliation was no longer confined to her marriage. It had infected her authority. At home, the distance between her and Nail solidified into something permanent. They moved around each other like political opponents, forced into the same building. No more shared dinners. No more casual conversations. Only strategy. One night, as she worked late in her home office, she heard Nail on the phone again. "Yes," he said quietly. "The board is leaning. Give it time." Leaning. Her pulse slowed into clarity. This was a coup, and the affair had been the gateway. She opened her laptop and began compiling documentation, emails, access logs, timestamp discrepancies. If he wanted war, she would not fight emotionally. She would fight intelligently. But beneath the calculation, beneath the strategic planning, something else burned. Betrayal. Not because he cheated, but because he underestimated her. He believed she would collapse under humiliation. He believed she was too invested in preserving her image to retaliate. He believed she would beg. As she closed her laptop that night, a cold understanding settled over her. Nail was playing innocent in public, charming in private, building influence one whisper at a time. He was not attacking directly. He was eroding her foundation. But he had forgotten something fundamental. Marcia did not build empires by accident. She anticipated threats, and she adapted faster than anyone else in the room. The affair was no longer the central wound. The real betrayal was strategic, professional, deliberate, and now fully exposed. Standing by the window overlooking the dark city skyline, Marcia allowed herself one final moment of grief. Then she let it go, because the next move would not be emotional. It would be decisive, and Nell had no idea how dangerous she could be when cornered. The first project collapsed on a Tuesday. It was subtle at first, an email from a long-term supplier requesting a delay in delivery due to unforeseen contractual misunderstandings. Marcia read the message twice. The terms had been finalized months ago. There were no misunderstandings. By Thursday, a second client requested a renegotiation. By Friday, a third quietly withdrew from preliminary talks. Individually, these disruptions could be explained. Markets fluctuated, competitors pressured, logistics shifted, but together, they formed a pattern. Marcia stood in front of the digital operations dashboard in her office, watching red indicators multiply where green had once dominated. Revenue projections dipped. Deadlines stretched. Internal efficiency metrics flagged irregularities. Someone was pulling threads, and pulling them deliberately. She called an emergency leadership meeting. The executives filed into the boardroom with unease written across their faces. Some avoided her gaze entirely. Others looked at her with a sympathy that felt almost rehearsed. "We are experiencing coordinated destabilization," Marcia began, her voice steady. "I want a full audit of vendor communications and project pipelines. Effective immediately." A murmur spread across the table. One executive cleared his throat. "Director, with respect, the board has concerns." "Concerns about what?" she asked. "About your recent decisions." There was again. Not data, not evidence. Concerns. Marcia turned to the screen and displayed performance reports from the last 3 years. Consistent growth, expansion, profitability. All under her leadership. These numbers speak for themselves. "They used to," another executive said quietly. "Used to." The shift was no longer hidden. It was coordinated. After the meeting, Marcia returned to her office and found an envelope waiting on her desk. No sender listed. Inside was a printed internal memo, one she had never written. It outlined a drastic cost-cutting strategy that would slash employee benefits and restructure departments aggressively. Her name was signed at the bottom. The signature was forged. Her jaw tightened. Within hours, rumors spread across departments. Employees whispered about layoffs. Department heads sent cautious emails requesting clarification. She had never authorized any such proposal. Someone had circulated it intentionally. She walked directly to Nail's office. He was seated comfortably behind his desk, reviewing documents. He looked up with mild surprise. "Director," he greeted smoothly. She placed the forged memo in front of him. "Care to explain?" He skimmed it briefly, expression neutral. "I heard about this. People are worried. You know I didn't write it." "Do I?" he replied, meeting her gaze evenly. The audacity stunned her, not because of the denial, but because of the calm. "You're destabilizing the company," she said quietly. "I'm stabilizing it," he corrected. "You're losing control. I built this, and now it needs new leadership." The words hung between them like a declaration of war. That afternoon, the board announced an emergency session for Monday morning. Marcia knew what that meant. Over the weekend, she worked relentlessly. She compiled evidence of falsified documents, access logs, and unauthorized communications. She prepared financial rebuttals. She anticipated every accusation she imagined they might raise. But even as she prepared, she sensed something darker. This was not about truth. It was about perception. Monday arrived cold and unforgiving. The boardroom felt different, colder, heavier, like a courtroom before sentencing. Every seat was filled, including legal advisors who were rarely present at routine meetings. Nail sat 3 seats down from the chairman, not beside her, not behind her, across from her. The chairman cleared his throat. "This session addresses serious concerns regarding leadership conduct and strategic instability." Marcia rose smoothly. "If there are allegations, I request specifics." Oh, there are specifics, another board member replied. A screen lit up behind her. Slide after slide displayed declining project metrics, client withdrawals, internal dissatisfaction surveys, and the forged memo, now presented as authentic. This memo, the chairman said gravely, has caused panic among senior staff. It is fabricated, Marcia responded sharply. The signature is forged. A legal advisor leaned forward. We have testimony suggesting otherwise. Testimony. Lena entered the room. Marcia's stomach tightened, not from fear, but from clarity. Lena avoided her eyes as she spoke. The director discussed restructuring with me personally, Lena said softly. She said sacrifices would be necessary. A lie. Carefully delivered. More statements followed. Executives claiming they had felt excluded from decision-making. Vendors claiming confusion about directives. Every narrative pointed to one theme. Authoritarian leadership. Poor communication. Strategic mismanagement. Marcia stood alone at the head of the table. She presented her evidence calmly. Access logs showing unusual activity under Nail's credentials. Timeline inconsistencies. Email metadata suggesting document manipulation. But the board's reactions were muted. The decision had already been shaped. The chairman folded his hands. Director, regardless of intent, the company's stability has been compromised under your leadership. Because someone inside is sabotaging it, she replied evenly. Are you accusing your husband? One board member asked pointedly. The room held its breath. Marcia did not look at Nail. I am accusing whoever is responsible. Nail spoke for the first time. With respect, he said, voice measured, almost regretful. I've tried to support Marcia through this period. But the pressure of the tender, the workload, it's affected her judgment. Gaslighting. Publicly. He continued. The company needs calm, collaborative leadership. Not isolation. Collaborative. The same word. Used again. The chairman sighed heavily. For the protection of shareholder interests, we are voting on immediate suspension pending investigation. The vote was swift. Unanimous. Marcia felt the decision land, not like a blow, but like gravity. This was the coup. Effective immediately, the chairman concluded. You are relieved of your duties as director. Security personnel stepped discreetly toward the doorway. The humiliation was complete. Marcia gathered her tablet slowly. No tears. No raised voice. No spectacle. As she walked past the table, she met Nail's eyes for the first time. He was smiling. Not broadly, but enough. Victory. She paused beside him. You believe this is the end? She asked quietly. He leaned back in his chair. It's evolution. She held his gaze for one long second. Then she walked out. The lobby that once quieted at her presence now buzzed with whispers. Employees pretended not to stare. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked relieved. Security escorted her to the parking lot as if she were a liability. As if she were the scandal. Inside her car, she allowed herself exactly 30 seconds. 30 seconds to feel the weight of betrayal. 30 seconds to acknowledge the magnitude of loss. Her company, her marriage, her authority, gone in one orchestrated strike. Then the seconds ended. She started the engine. Across town, Nail stood at the head of the boardroom once more. The chairman shook his hand. Interim director, he announced. Applause followed. Nail adjusted his jacket, confidence radiating from him like armor. He believed he had outmaneuvered her. Believed the narrative was sealed. Believed the tender would secure his permanent position. But he had overlooked one critical factor. The tender agreement had been negotiated personally by Marcia. The final authorization rested solely with her. As Nail basked in congratulations, unaware of the detail he had failed to secure, Marcia drove home. Not defeated, not broken, but calculating. They had turned her into a scandal, thrown her away to protect their illusion of stability. Let them celebrate. Let them believe the throne was his. Because power taken through betrayal always carries a flaw. And she knew exactly where his was. The morning after the coup felt unnaturally quiet. No urgent calls. No calendar alerts. No executives waiting outside her office door. Marcia sat alone at the dining table that once hosted celebratory dinners after major deals. The house felt larger now, emptier. Neil had not come home the night before. She doubted he intended to. For the first time in years, her schedule was blank. And yet her mind was anything but. She replayed the board meeting in sharp detail. The fabricated memo. Lena's rehearsed testimony. The unanimous vote. Neil's calm, practiced humility as he positioned himself as the stabilizing force. He had planned this carefully, but in his ambition, he had overlooked something fundamental. Control is not the same as ownership. Marcia rose slowly and walked to her home office. Inside the locked drawer of her desk was a slim black folder, one she had deliberately kept outside company archives. The tender agreement, months of negotiation, private meetings, strategic concessions, international correspondence, and most importantly, the conditional clause. The contract required final executive authorization from the original negotiating director. Her. Without her signature, the deal could not be executed. And without the deal, the company's projected 5-year expansion would evaporate. She sat down and opened the folder carefully, reviewing the clauses once more. The final approval deadline was approaching. Investors were expecting confirmation. The board was counting on it. Neil was counting on it. She imagined him sitting in her former office, issuing directives confidently, presenting himself as the architect of the upcoming victory. The tender would validate his takeover. It would silence doubts. He believed it was already secured. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She answered calmly. Marcia, this is Daniel Ross from Orion Infrastructure. We haven't received the final signed authorization yet. Is everything proceeding as discussed? Daniel's tone was polite but firm. Orion was the contracting giant behind the tender. Everything is proceeding, she replied smoothly. But there has been a leadership transition. A pause. Yes, we were informed. Your husband mentioned he would finalize the paperwork. Her lips curved slightly. I'm afraid that won't be possible. Silence. The agreement stipulates my personal authorization, she continued. And after recent developments, I am reevaluating the partnership. Daniel's voice sharpened. Are you withdrawing? She stared at the skyline beyond her window. Yes. The word felt like a blade cutting cleanly. Marcia, Daniel said carefully, this will create significant financial consequences for your company. I'm aware. And for your former board, I'm aware of that too. She ended the call before emotion could seep into her tone. For a moment, she simply sat there. Not triumphant, not angry, just resolute. She opened her laptop and drafted a formal withdrawal notice, citing strategic instability and misalignment in executive governance. The language was precise, professional, irreversible. With one final click, she sent it. The dominoes began falling within hours. At noon, financial analysts began questioning Orion's sudden reallocation of infrastructure funds. By mid-afternoon, industry news platforms reported that the anticipated partnership had unexpectedly dissolved. Inside the company headquarters, chaos erupted. Investors demanded explanations. Stock projections dipped sharply. 2 major banks postponed credit extensions pending clarity on leadership stability. And Neil, newly crowned interim director, was blindsided. He stormed into the executive conference room, where the board sat in emergency session once again. What do you mean it's withdrawn? He demanded. The chairman's face was pale. Orion confirmed cancellation this morning. They cited executive instability. Neil's jaw clenched. That's impossible. The agreement was finalized, not signed. The word struck like a hammer. Why wasn't it signed? Another board member snapped. Neil's mind raced. Because Marcia had insisted on handling final authorization personally. Because he had assumed she would sign before he removed her. Because he had been too eager. He pulled out his phone and dialed her number. It rang once. Twice. Then she answered. What did you do? He demanded. I made a strategic decision, she replied calmly. You're destroying the company. No, she corrected. You already did that. You're being vindictive. I'm being precise. He lowered his voice. You can't just pull a deal of this magnitude. I can, she said evenly. And I did. The line went silent for a moment. You think this will bring you back? He asked coldly. I don't want to come back. The truth unsettled him more than anger would have. Back in the boardroom, panic intensified. Without the tender, projected revenue for the next fiscal year collapsed by nearly 40%. Expansion plans froze instantly. Several executives quietly began updating their resumes. Within 48 hours, the company's stock value dropped sharply. Industry blogs began questioning the legitimacy of the leadership transition. Anonymous leaks hinted at internal power struggles. Speculation grew. Nail attempted damage control, public statements about strategic realignment, emergency negotiations with alternative partners, but none carried the weight of Orion's endorsement. Because everyone knew the truth. The tender had been Marcia's masterpiece, and it had been withdrawn by her hand. Meanwhile, Marcia remained silent publicly. She declined media interviews, ignored speculation, refused to engage in public drama. Instead, she focused on something far more powerful. Documentation. She compiled evidence of the forged memo, unauthorized system access, timeline inconsistencies. She forwarded discrete copies to legal counsel, not for immediate action, for leverage. Days turned into weeks. The company hemorrhaged credibility. 2 senior executives resigned. A key investor withdrew support. Internal morale plummeted. Lena, once emboldened by proximity to power, began distancing herself from Nail. Rumors circulated that she was seeking opportunities elsewhere. Nail felt it, the slow erosion. He had seized the throne, but it was built on sand. One evening, he returned to the house for the first time since the coup. Marcia was sitting in the living room, reading quietly. You're proud of this? He asked bitterly. She looked up slowly. I'm realistic. You burned everything. You replaced me without securing the foundation. His expression darkened. You could have been part of this. I was the foundation. The truth hung heavy between them. He paced the room, frustration radiating from him. You think people will admire you for this? I don't need admiration. Then what do you need? She closed her book gently. Balance. He stared at her, searching for cracks in her composure. But she was steady, calm, unshaken. For the first time since the takeover, doubt flickered in his eyes. He had expected tears, begging, public retaliation. Instead, she had chosen something far more devastating. Silence, precision, consequences. Within another week, the board called an emergency shareholder assembly. Questions were sharp, accusations sharper. How was the tender not secured before leadership change? Why was due diligence incomplete? Why were contingency plans absent? Each question tightened the pressure around Nail's authority. He blamed market volatility. He blamed timing. He blamed Marcia's emotional reaction. But no one missed the irony. The company had been stable under her. It was collapsing under him. As the weeks progressed, layoffs began. Projects were shelved. Partnerships dissolved. The empire Nail had imagined ruling was crumbling before it fully formed. And Marcia watched, not with cruelty, but with clarity. She had not destroyed the company. She had removed the illusion that held it together. One evening, she received a call from Daniel Ross again. We're impressed by how you handle the situation, he said carefully. If you ever consider leading a new venture, Orion would be open to discussion. A faint smile touched her lips. Thank you. She ended the call and stood by the window. The city lights glittered below. She had lost a title, lost a marriage, lost the building that once bore her authority. But she had kept something more valuable, her leverage, and her self-respect. Across town, Nail sat alone in the dim boardroom that once applauded him. The applause had faded. The congratulations had stopped. In their place was scrutiny, pressure, fear. He had wanted power. He had seized it, but he had forgotten one critical truth. Power without foresight collapses, and the one key he had overlooked was the woman he thought he had discarded. The collapse didn't arrive like an explosion. It arrived like rot. Slow at first, hidden beneath polished statements and carefully edited reports, then suddenly visible in every corner of the company Neil had claimed as his new kingdom. On Monday morning, Neil stood in the executive hallway and watched employees walk past with their heads lowered. The usual hum of ambition had been replaced by caution. Whispers traveled faster than emails. People spoke in half sentences and stopped when he approached. In the boardroom, the chairman no longer greeted him with confidence. He greeted him with exhaustion. "We've received another withdrawal," the chairman said, sliding a document across the table. Vastline Logistics terminated their agreement. They cited instability. Neil stared at the paper. "They're overreacting. They're protecting themselves," another board member corrected sharply. "Which is what we should have done before we made you interim director." The room fell silent. Neil's mouth tightened. "Are we really doing this now, when we should be focusing on recovery?" The legal advisor cleared his throat. "Recovery requires credibility. Right now, credibility is bleeding." Neil felt heat rise behind his eyes. He wanted to slam his fist on the table. He wanted to remind them that they had voted unanimously, that they had handed him the role, that they had applauded. But applause did not equal loyalty, and loyalty did not survive panic. By midday, the company's stock had dropped again. News outlets began running headlines that sounded like warning sirens. Leadership turmoil sparks investor flight. Major tender deal pulled amid corporate power shift. Board accused of mishandling governance. Every article mentioned Marcia's name. Some described her as the visionary forced out. Others called her the silent architect of the company's rise. And with every mention, Neil's authority shrank. The board tried to contain the story. They pushed narratives about restructuring and market transition. They leaked positive projections to friendly journalists. They posted optimistic announcements on corporate channels. But rumors were faster. Former employees began speaking anonymously online. A supplier hinted at internal sabotage. Industry insiders speculated about a hostile takeover gone wrong. And then the most damaging rumor emerged. Quietly at first, then louder. Marcia had been removed to secure the tender. But the tender never came. Because she still held the signature. Because Neil couldn't secure what she built. That rumor spread like gasoline. The investors didn't need proof. They needed certainty. And certainty was gone. At the end of the week, the bank called. Credit extensions were suspended. Loans would be reviewed. Collateral demanded. The chairman demanded an emergency meeting again. This time, it wasn't strategy. It was survival. Neil walked into the boardroom with a tight smile, carrying the weight of a crumbling empire. On the screen behind the chairman, a new graph displayed the company's finances, each line falling like a dying heartbeat. "We're approaching insolvency," the chairman said, voice flat. Neil scoffed. "That's dramatic." The CFO spoke, measured and cold. "If we cannot stabilize liquidity within 60 days, we will miss payroll." The room shifted. That word, payroll, terrified everyone more than stock drops. When you miss payroll, you lose not just money, but people. And when you lose people, everything else collapses with them. Neil leaned forward. "We can secure a new partnership. We can renegotiate." "With what trust?" a board member snapped. "You don't have Marcia's reputation. You don't have her relationships. You don't even have her signature." Neil's eyes hardened. "We don't need her." A quiet laugh came from another board member. Not amused, bitter. "We needed her. We just didn't realize it until she left." The words struck like a slap. Neil left the meeting with his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. In the elevator, he caught his reflection in the mirrored walls. Eyes tired, suit still sharp, but no longer powerful. He looked like a man wearing a crown made of paper. When he reached his office, Lena was waiting. She stood near his desk, arms crossed, expression anxious but impatient, like someone waiting for a delayed promise. "They're saying layoffs are coming," she blurted. Neil sighed. "We're managing the situation." "That's not an answer." Her tone was different, less sweet, less admiring. She had always smiled when he walked into a room, always made him feel like he was finally the man in control. Now she looked at him like a risk. "I can't lose my job," she said. "I have responsibilities." Neil's mouth tightened. "Do you think I'm enjoying this?" Lena hesitated, then stepped closer. Maybe you should talk to Marcia." The suggestion sliced through his pride. "I'm not begging her." "You don't have to beg," Lena said quickly. "Just negotiate. You're good at negotiation, right?" Right. As if she hadn't watched him manipulate his way into power. As if she hadn't benefited from his ambition. As if she wasn't part of the reason Marcia had been destroyed. Neil stared at her. "Is that what you want? For me to fix it?" "I want stability," she said plainly. "I didn't sign up for a sinking ship." He felt something inside him crack. Something uglier than heartbreak. "So that's it," he said quietly. "You're leaving." Lena's eyes flickered. "Don't twist this. I'm trying to protect myself." Of course she was. She had never loved him. She had loved the position, the influence, the future he promised when he thought the tender would crown him. And now the future was smoke. Lena reached for her bag. "I'm going to apply elsewhere. I just wanted you to know." Neil watched her walk out without looking back. No apology. No loyalty. Just exit. The silence she left behind was louder than any headline. That night, Neil stayed late in the building, staring at the city from Marcia's former office, the office he had claimed, the desk he now occupied. He remembered how it felt the first time he sat here, thinking he had finally stepped out of her shadow. Now he understood the truth. It wasn't her shadow. It was her structure. And without it, everything collapsed. He poured himself a drink from the minibar and drank it too quickly. His phone buzzed with messages. Investor meeting postponed. Media inquiry pending. Board requesting your resignation discussion. Resignation. The word was a knife turning slowly. Meanwhile, across the city, Marcia's life moved in a different rhythm. She had rented a small temporary apartment. Minimalistic, quiet, clean. No memories on the walls. No echoes of betrayal. Just space. Space to rebuild. Every morning, she woke before sunrise, put on running shoes, and ran along the river. The physical exhaustion calmed her mind. It reminded her that she still owned her body, her breath, her future. After breakfast, she studied, not because she needed to prove anything, but because she refused to stagnate. She enrolled in an executive strategy program she had once postponed. She met quietly with mentors from older industries, people who understood political warfare inside corporations. She attended closed networking events where influential leaders spoke about governance failures and leadership resilience. Marcia listened more than she spoke. She watched. She observed how power moved when cameras were off. And she sharpened herself. She also met with legal counsel, not with vengeance in mind, but with preparation. Her lawyer compiled her evidence into a clean, undeniable sequence. Timestamps, logs, document metadata, witness contradictions. Marcia didn't rush. She didn't need to. Time was now her ally. One afternoon, she received a message from an unknown number. "Neil wants to talk." She stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she deleted the message. She was not rebuilding her life to negotiate with betrayal. She was rebuilding to transcend it. Back at the company, bankruptcy became a real word spoken out loud. In the hallway, in meetings, in the quiet pauses where hope used to live, the board began distancing themselves from Neil. They leaked their own narratives now, each trying to appear less responsible, each trying to preserve their future reputations. The media smelled blood. A reporter cornered Neil after a meeting. "Mr. Neil, did you orchestrate Marcia's removal to secure the tender deal?" Neil forced a smile. Leadership changes happen for many reasons. But the tender was withdrawn because Marcia held authorization correct. No comment. The camera captured the twitch in his jaw. It went viral. Investors demanded accountability. Online forums called him a fraud. Former supporters turned silent. The board's emails became colder. Their tone became legal. And then the final humiliation arrived. A formal notice. Emergency board session. Motion to remove interim director Neil. Nail read it twice. Then again. His hands trembled, not from fear but from rage. He had sacrificed everything. His marriage, his integrity, his reputation. And for what? A position that lasted weeks. A throne that melted under his feet. He sat alone in the office as the city darkened outside. The building's lights turned off floor by floor until his was the last illuminated rectangle in the skyline. He thought of Marcia, calm, controlled, untouchable. He had wanted to destroy her. Instead, he had exposed himself. The next morning, he walked into the boardroom and saw it clearly. They had already decided. The chairman did not look at him with respect. He looked at him like an error. Nail felt the world narrowing. He opened his mouth to defend himself, to argue, to persuade. But persuasion required credibility, and credibility had turned to ash. While the board voted, Nail heard only one thing inside his head. Marcia's voice. I was the foundation, and now he was watching everything he stole. Burn down to nothing. Marcia did not attend the Global Leadership Summit to be seen. She attended to observe. The ballroom of the five-star hotel shimmered with polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Industry leaders gathered in tailored suits and controlled smiles, exchanging ideas about governance reform, market recovery, and strategic reinvention. Marcia stood near the back during the keynote session, her posture composed, her presence quiet but unmistakable. She wore a sleek charcoal dress, elegant without being loud. No longer director. No longer a scandal, just Marcia. And yet, she carried herself like someone who had survived fire and chosen not to burn. On stage stood Adrian Vale, CEO of Vale Dynamics, a multinational conglomerate known for ethical leadership and strategic discipline. He was in his early 40s, tall, sharp-featured, his voice steady and unforced. He spoke about corporate integrity not as branding, but as architecture. Power without governance, Adrian said, is temporary. It collapses under its own ego. The words struck Marcia like recognition. After the session, guests gathered in small circles. Marcia considered leaving quietly, but before she could, a calm voice approached from behind. You disagreed with my second point. She turned. Adrian Vale stood before her, not with arrogance, but curiosity. About stakeholder transparency, she asked. He nodded slightly. You shook your head. She studied him carefully. Transparency is necessary, but without structural leverage, transparency becomes performance. A slow smile appeared on his face. Interesting, he said. Most people just applaud. I'm not most people. That answer earned a low, amused laugh. Adrian Vale, he said, extending his hand. Marcia. His eyes sharpened subtly at the name. I know who you are, he said evenly. You built one of the most efficient mid-sized firms in the sector. Built, she repeated softly. Yes, he said. And from what I've seen, you were removed before it was finished. There was no pity in his tone, only respect. They moved to a quieter corner of the room, and what began as professional debate evolved into something more layered. They spoke about board manipulation, strategic timing, reputation warfare, and the cost of ambition. Adrian did not interrupt her. He did not dominate the conversation. He listened, and when he challenged her ideas, he did so thoughtfully, not defensively. You would have handled the coup differently, he said at one point. No, she replied calmly. I handled it exactly as needed. And you don't regret it? I regret trusting the wrong person, not pulling the lever. He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. I respect that, he said. That night, he asked if she would join him for coffee the following afternoon, not as a gesture of sympathy, but as a strategic conversation. She considered declining. Instead, she accepted. Their second meeting was quieter. No ballroom. No audience. Just two minds aligned across a small table. Adrian had done his research. He knew the details of the tender withdrawal. The board's collapse. Nail's removal. You could have destroyed them publicly, he observed. I didn't need to, she replied. You chose restraint. I chose longevity. He leaned back slightly. Would you consider building again? The question wasn't casual. It was an invitation. Marcia felt something unfamiliar stir, not ambition alone, but possibility. "What are you offering?" she asked. "Not rescue," he said immediately. "Partnership." The word landed differently than it had when Nail once used it. This time, it wasn't manipulative. It wasn't strategic positioning. It was equal. Over the next weeks, their meetings multiplied. Some were formal, discussions about governance frameworks and expansion models. Others were unexpectedly personal. Adrian shared stories of his early failures, of investors who underestimated him, of a board that once tried to sideline him before he consolidated control legally and ethically. He did not pretend to be flawless. He did not hide vulnerability behind ego. And slowly, Marcia felt something shift inside her. Trust, not blind, not reckless, but cautious and earned. One evening, after a long strategy session at Veil Dynamics headquarters, Adrian walked her to the lobby. "You operate like someone who expects betrayal," he said gently. She didn't deny it. "I operate like someone who survived it." He nodded. "Fair." Then he added, "You don't have to survive alone anymore." The simplicity of the statement unsettled her more than grand declarations ever could. Weeks turned into months. Marcia joined Veil Dynamics as Chief Strategy Partner, her title deliberate, structured for authority without dependency. She rebuilt not under Adrian's shadow but beside him. Together, they restructured underperforming divisions, launched new ethical investment models, and restored trust in sectors where manipulation had once ruled. Industry media began noticing. Veil Dynamics reinvents governance model. Strategic power duo reshapes corporate stability. For the first time since her removal, Marcia stood in front of cameras again. Not as a fallen director, not as a victim, but as an architect reborn. And this time she was stronger. Because she was no longer driven by proving herself. She was driven by purpose. One evening, after a successful acquisition announcement, Adrian invited her to a private dinner on the rooftop of the company's headquarters. The city stretched endlessly below them. "You've transformed this company in less than a year," he said quietly. "We transformed it," she corrected. He smiled softly. "I've worked with brilliant people," he continued. "But you're different." "How?" "You don't chase power. You stabilize it." She looked at him, searching for manipulation. There was none, just admiration. "Marcia," he said, his voice lowering slightly, "I don't want this to remain purely professional." Her heart did not race and panic like it once would have. It steadied, because this felt grounded, real. "You understand what that means?" she asked. "It means I will never compete with you," he replied. "Only stand beside you." That was the moment she knew. Love did not need to overpower. It needed to align. Their relationship grew organically, not dramatic, not chaotic. It was built on shared decision-making, mutual respect, and transparent communication. When disagreements arose, they discussed them without ego. When challenges appeared, they strategized together. Marcia felt something she had never felt with Nail. Security without submission. Strength without loneliness. 1 year after their first meeting, Adrian proposed. Not in a spectacle, not in public, but in the quiet privacy of the same rooftop where their partnership had deepened. "No rescue," he reminded her softly. "Just choice." She smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. "Yes." The wedding was elegant but restrained. Industry leaders attended. Media covered it with admiration rather than scandal. Marcia walked down the aisle not as a woman redeemed by marriage, but as a woman who chose love from strength. As she stood beside Adrian, exchanging vows, she realized something profound. With Nail, she had fought to maintain balance. With Adrian, balance came naturally. When the ceremony ended and applause filled the hall, Marcia felt not triumph but completion. She had lost everything once, and rebuilt something greater. Not because she needed revenge, but because she understood her worth. For the first time in years, she no longer felt like a queen defending her throne. She felt like a leader building an empire that no one could steal. And beside her stood a man who never wanted to take it, only to build it together. The ballroom glittered like a declaration. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above polished marble floors. A live orchestra filled the air with elegant restraint. Cameras flashed discreetly along the entrance corridor, capturing industry leaders, investors, and media figures as they gathered for the most anticipated reception of the year. It was officially a post-merger celebration for Veil Dynamics' newest international acquisition. Unofficially, it was something else. It was Marcia's return. When the master of ceremonies announced their arrival, the double doors opened slowly. Adrian stepped in first, calm, confident, composed. And beside him, Marcia. She wore a midnight silver gown that caught the light without demanding it. Her posture was effortless, her expression serene. Not triumphant, not defiant, untouchable. The applause began softly, then swelled into something undeniable. Not polite clapping. Recognition. Respect. Cameras turned toward her instinctively. Conversations paused. Executives adjusted their posture as she walked through the room. Adrian's hand rested lightly at the small of her back. Not possessive, not protective. Equal. As they made their way through the crowd, congratulatory remarks flowed from every direction. Brilliant strategy on the acquisition. You've reshaped the sector. An inspiring comeback. Marcia thanked each speaker with grace, her smile measured and sincere. But across the room, standing near the far column beneath a dimmer chandelier, was a man who did not clap. Nail. His suit was still sharp, but it no longer fit him the same way. Confidence had drained from his posture. His once assured smile now seemed rehearsed and brittle. He had been invited as a minor industry attendee, no longer a CEO, no longer a director. Just another name on a networking list. And now, he was watching the woman he had once removed from power commander room he could no longer influence. His chest tightened. The irony was suffocating. When Marcia's eyes briefly swept across the ballroom, they paused on him for half a second. No shock, no bitterness, just acknowledgement. Then she moved on. That hurt more than anger would have. As the evening progressed, Adrian delivered a short speech about governance, resilience, and the importance of integrity in leadership. His words were precise, strategic, and subtly pointed. True strength, Adrian concluded, is not in taking power but in earning it. Applause erupted again. Nail felt the words settle like stones in his stomach. He had not planned to approach them, but desperation alters pride. His name had been circulating in whispers lately, associated with corporate failure, boardroom instability, and miscalculated ambition. No new firm would partner with him without a reputational bridge, and Adrian Vale was that bridge. If he could secure even a minor collaboration, advisory work, joint venture consultation, it would signal redemption. He waited until the applause thinned and Adrian stepped down from the stage. Then he moved. Each step toward them felt heavier than the last. Marcia was speaking with a small group of investors when Nail approached Adrian directly. Mr. Vale, Nail said smoothly, extending his hand. Congratulations on the acquisition. Adrian turned politely, accepting the handshake. Thank you, he replied. I'm Nail, he continued, former interim director of... I'm aware, Adrian said calmly. The subtle cut in his tone did not go unnoticed. Nail swallowed but pressed forward. I've been following your expansion strategy closely. Impressive structuring. Thank you. I believe there may be opportunities for collaboration, Nail added. My experience in governance restructuring could complement your next phase of development. Marcia, still engaged in conversation nearby, heard every word. She did not interrupt. She did not rescue. She simply observed. Adrian studied Nail for a brief, deliberate moment. Governance restructuring, Adrian repeated. Yes, Nail said, regaining a sliver of confidence. I've navigated high-pressure transitions, complex board dynamics. A few nearby guests subtly slowed their movements, sensing the tension. Adrian's voice remained even. You mean the transition that resulted in a 40% value collapse? The words landed cleanly. A faint ripple of murmurs spread. Nail's jaw tightened. Every transformation has turbulence. Turbulence implies recovery, Adrian replied. Your tenure resulted in bankruptcy proceedings. Silence thickened. Neil forced a small laugh. That narrative lacks nuance. I prefer data over nuance, Adrian said quietly. Marcia turned slightly, her expression still composed. Neil shifted his strategy. Regardless of the past, I believe in future alignment. I'd welcome the opportunity to demonstrate my capabilities. Adrian did not hesitate. I don't partner with leaders who destabilize organizations for personal leverage. The words were clear, public, unambiguous. Color drained from Neil's face. I think you're misinformed, he said, voice tightening. Adrian's gaze sharpened, not aggressive but final. I am exceptionally well informed. A few guests exchanged glances. The humiliation was no longer subtle. Neil's pride flared. With respect, Mr. Vale, every leader makes difficult decisions. Difficult decisions protect institutions, Adrian replied. Yours destroyed one. There it was. The verdict. Not shouted. Marcia stepped closer, not to intervene, but to stand beside her husband. Neil looked at her then. Really looked. She did not look wounded. She did not look vengeful. She looked complete. Marcia, he said, his voice softer now. We built something once. She tilted her head slightly. No, she corrected gently. I built it. A few nearby guests inhaled sharply. Neil's composure cracked. You're enjoying this. Marcia's lips curved, not cruelly but knowingly. I'm observing consequences. The orchestra continued playing softly in the background, indifferent to the unraveling scene. Neil glanced around and finally saw it, the eyes on him. Not admiring, not supportive, evaluating. He had once believed public perception could be manipulated. Now he was experiencing it in reverse. He lowered his voice, attempting one final plea. You don't have to shut me out completely. Marcia held his gaze steadily. You shut yourself out. Adrian's hand rested calmly at her back once more. Neil, Adrian said, voice level. I wish you clarity moving forward. But there will be no collaboration. The finality was undeniable. Security did not need to intervene. Neil stepped back on his own. The applause from another part of the ballroom resumed as the next segment of the evening began. The spotlight shifted away from him as quickly as it had once shifted toward him. And suddenly, he was just another man standing in a room too large for his diminished presence. Marcia watched him retreat toward the edge of the ballroom, the same way she had once walked out of her company under security escort. The symmetry was almost poetic, but she did not feel rage. She did not feel bitterness. She felt release. The man who once orchestrated her removal now stood powerless in her room. She commanded without effort. Adrian leaned slightly toward her. Are you all right? She looked at him, steady warm. I've never been better. Across the room, Neil paused near the exit. For a fleeting moment, he looked back. He saw Marcia laughing softly at something Adrian whispered in her ear. Not a mocking laugh. Not loud. Just genuine. Free. In that sound, he understood something too late. He had mistaken control for strength. He had mistaken ambition for superiority. He had mistaken her resilience for dependence. And now, everything he had tried to steal had evolved beyond his reach. Marcia lifted her champagne glass, lightly as the orchestra swelled. Not to toast revenge, but to acknowledge growth, to survival, to sovereignty. She did not need to destroy Neil. His own choices had done that for her. As the night unfolded, guests continued gravitating toward her, and Adrian, drawn not by scandal, but by stability. Marcia no longer needed to defend her throne. She had built a new kingdom, stronger, wiser, unshakable. And in the center of the ballroom, under crystal light and collective admiration, she stood not as a fallen queen returned, but as a woman who had transformed loss into legacy. Untouchable, forever beyond the reach of the man who once believed he could erase her.